So one of the components for learning how to identify low to high contrast will be the first part of this project, where you're going to choose 5 of your own individual images and you're going to adjust them to a black and white image, making them everything from low contrast to high contrast. By performing this exercise, it's going to train your eye and your mind what contrast really is. So again, notice the low contrast is missing blacks and whites. The high contrast has lots of blacks and whites, but is missing midtones. And then this is a nice range in between. So let's start with this image. I'll hit the Tab key, bring back my toolbar and panels. And the first thing I'm going to do is duplicate this by hitting Command or Control J, and I'm going to name it flat. Now I want to make this image grayscale and flat. So we know the quickest way to convert an image to black and white, Command Shift U, and that's pretty flat. Let's add a levels adjustment layer. And typically remember what defines a flat image, a tonally flat image. Typically it's missing black or white, which this image is. If I were just to pull open my midtones a touch, and I can even pull in my, depending on your image, if it has a lot of blacks and whites already, you may need to pull in your output slider and on the white side and the black side. See how flat that makes that image? Now for the purposes of this project, I'm going to have you compress all your adjustments into a final image, and you'll see why at the end. Typically you would not do this. Typically, I'm a big fan of leaving all adjustment layers visible and available. Put them in groups if you need to organize them. This is for this specific project. So I'll hit Command or Control E, which will flatten down one layer. So now I want to hide that. Go back to my original, hit Command or Control J, pull it to the top. And remember, the next one is Auto Contrast. I'm going to rename my layer Auto, and you do that just by clicking in the layer name and allows you to rename it. Okay, now it needs to be black and white. I need to convert this to black and white, so I'll just do the quick Command Shift U because that's the quickest way. And now I want to apply auto contrast, and I'm going to do this with the levels dialog box. Now, if you remember, we've actually manipulated our levels dialog box. Depending on how much you followed along with the other videos, you've already reprogrammed what auto does. Let's take a peek. So if I go into those little lines, it opens up this extra dialog box. It says auto options. Yeah, see, it has my enhanced per channel contrast, which is by far the best thing to do. But this is the default, enhanced brightness and contrast. So I'm going to reset it to that just for this one image. So as soon as I click OK, that's what it's going to do. It's going to apply it just for this one image. But see, there's the enhanced per channel contrast. See how that's really good? I'll click OK. So now I have auto applied. I'll hit Command or Control E to flatten that down. I'll turn it off, go back to my original, Command or Control J, click and drag it to the top. I'll see that cyan line going across the top and I'll let go. I'll double click on the layer name and here I'll type normal. Now this needs to be normal contrast. So I'll add that gradient map. And if yours comes in reversed and looks something like this, just toggle the reverse key. Typically, this is how it will show up if your default colors are set to black and white in that order. So this is pretty good normal contrast. I'll just flatten that down. I mean, that looks like I have whites. It looks like I have blacks. We can check it by just adding a levels adjustment layer. Okay, see, that's where our eye is lying to us a bit. We mathematically don't have the entire contrast range. So here we would do one of our techniques where we bring in the black slider of the base of mountain, the white slider of the base of mountain. I'm going to pull my midtones about there. So there we are. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift click on that color layer. So we'll automatically select all 3. And I'll just hit Command or Control E, which will squish them and flatten them all together. Change the name, so I need to rename it again, normal, turn it off, go back to the original, Command or Control J, go up to the top, see that blue cyan line. And I'm not going to bother renaming this in case I have that same issue I had a moment ago. So I'm going to add the gradient map. I'm going to add a levels adjustment, and I'm going to hit my auto this set to the RGB per channel contrast because I know that's going to do a really good job. I'm going to click OK and stretch this back out. And that's moderate contrast. I would agree. That's really strong. So I can Command or Control click each layer I want to squish together. Hit Command or Control E to do that. Double click on the layer name, type moderate, and you want to do these same steps I'm doing. You want to have your files renamed, all the adjustments collapsed into an individual image file because of a production technique I'm going to teach you in just a bit. All right, so now we just have the high contrast. So go back to the original, hit Command or Control J, drag it to the top, see the blue or cyan line, release it. And again, I probably shouldn't rename it now in case I have to do that same issue as earlier. I'll do black and white adjustment layer, and I will add a levels adjustment and I will hit auto, but then I'll drag in my black slider and my white slider even further. I mean, I could go crazy. Try not to go crazy, but just figure out where you still have an exciting image, but it's obviously high contrast, but not a blown out like drawing where it's not so extreme. We just need it to be a higher contrast image. So I'm gonna call that higher contrast. I'll shift click on that color one so it selects all three, the black and white conversion and the levels adjustment. Command or Control E, double click on the name, type high contrast. Done. So I'm gonna turn that off, go back to the original, double click on that, and call it original. Not that we wouldn't know that because it's in color. So now you've done everything required for the first part of the project. Remember, you just need to do this to 5 images. So flat, auto contrast, not bad. Normal contrast, nice. Moderate contrast, that's where my tastes tend to lie. And high contrast. Maybe my high contrast is a little heavy-handed, but that's perfectly okay. It's definitely a high contrast image. So now let me show you how to get all of these images out ready for upload to the Adobe Spark page. Because otherwise we'd have to manually, how would you save out these individual layer files? You would probably select the top one, go up to File, Save As. It's going to bring up a dialog box of where we want to save it. And I have to rename it up here. I'd name this one high contrast. And notice, because there are layers embedded, it only wants to save it as a PSD file, which we don't want. And currently it's just going to go everywhere. So I want to put a new folder on my desktop and say Project 1 to make my life easier later to find stuff. So I want to come down to Format, go down to JPEG, choose JPEG. I don't want to embed the color profile of Adobe RGB or Adobe 1998. My computer is set up for that because it's calibrated for printing. But if you're sending anything to the web to be viewed on another computer, you always want to save it as sRGB. So I want to uncheck that. And it's saying you can only do this as a copy because it's going to automatically flatten the file, showing me the top most visible file. So then I click Save, and then I have to choose, the compression that I want. So I would choose between 10 and 12 if it's for print and you're leaving it as JPEG, definitely go 12. For here, 10 is totally fine. Click OK. So now when I go over and look at my project file, I double click on it just outside of your viewing area. You can see high contrast image has been saved. So then I turn that off. I don't have to click on this next one because it's only going to do the next most visible. I go to File, Save As. Do you see how redundant this is? I got to repeat this whole process. You get the idea. I've got to change the format. I've got to change the color profile. There's just so many steps to doing this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete that first high contrast one we did. Move to trash. I'm going to leave the folder there though. So here's how you let Photoshop do the heavy lifting for you. Because we've named the individual files and we don't have adjustment layers attached to them, they're just images per file. So what you're going to do this quickly is go up to File and Export. Oh, and look, there's something called Export Layers to File. Now actually, I waited to this point before I did it because what have I not done? Which you should always do before you output your files. Well, what size do you want them to be uploaded at? Let's see what size they are. Image size. All right, these are very small images. So they're already only 538 by 810 pixels. They're small. Essentially, I would say for these images, around normal HD would be perfectly appropriate. 720 by 1280. Now, if you wanted to save it smaller, that's fine. I probably wouldn't go smaller than this, but you want to do this because I am sure your image is coming in at 24 megabytes. So there's probably 3000 by 4000 pixels or 4000 by 5000 pixels. I'm sure your image is huge. So before I output all these layers to files and then I have to go in and run a command to individually resize all of them, I could do it right here, right now. So I could just say, make this 600 pixels. I leave the chain activated. So it's going to auto correct the height. I click OK. And now I've just made every single one of these that size. Now I can go to File, Export Layers to Files, and it's going to ask, where would you like this? And I will say, I would like this on my desktop. I would like it in my Project 1 folder, and I'm going to click Open, File Name Prefix. Here's where you're going to put your name, student name, visible layers only. Yes. Output it as a JPEG. Yes, please. Include ICC profile is fine to leave default checked. And again, I can choose here if I want to compress it to quality of 10. The reason people go to quality of 10 for web is because it basically 1/3 to 1/2 your file size, and you can't optically tell a difference. Visually, you won't be able to tell. I'm gonna hit Run. Export layers to files was successful. Let me open up my file and look at that. All of my images have been renamed. Student name, there's a number there, and then high contrast, moderate, normal, auto. So it took my layer names and added it to my student name. Perfect. Could not ask for better.